Ashtyn Tayler is a medical student at the University of Texas Medical School who volunteered last week in Texas to help migrant children and parents as they left Border Patrol processing centers. Here is some of what she saw. This child had a scalp abscess, but his mother was afraid to tell Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers for fear of them taking the child away from her. And this woman had welts and blisters from an ankle bracelet that was too painfully tight. And this woman was kept in what immigration officials called a cold box for 7 days because one of her daughters had an ear infection and the other had the flu. They were told the Border Patrol uses the cold boxes to kill germs. Joining our discussion now, Ashtyn Tayler. She's a pre-med student at the University of Texas who has been volunteering at the border at a center that helps migrants who have been released by U.S. Border Patrol processing in McAllen, Texas. Ashtyn, can you tell us more about what you saw there, and especially in terms of medical issues?
Hello, Lawrence. Thank you. As far as medical issues, when we're seeing immigrants who are coming from these detention centers, it's pretty atrocious from a humanitarian perspective and just from a personal perspective. Most everybody who's coming out of these detention centers and into the respite center, they are febrile, they have fevers, they're dehydrated. A lot of them have very, very easily preventable diseases, flu, cough, cold, bacterial infections, things that are just rampant when you have such close quarters and under the conditions in which they're kept, which are extreme cold, insufficient hydration, insufficient food, and insufficient sanitation.
Ashtyn, this story about the cold box being an idea that the border officials are using to kill germs, where did they get that idea?
Lawrence, I have no idea, and that's what I find particularly disturbing is that CBP officials seem to be assuring everybody that these people are adequately cared for and given medical attention, but as far as I know, I don't see any medical basis at all for keeping people in cold rooms. And as it was reported to me directly in the clinic office by people who came through, by immigrants who came out of these hieleros, which are the cold boxes, they were kept in there if they showed any signs of illness. So these are, think of, concrete walls, floors, and ceilings, and maybe temperatures of 50 to 60 degrees. And these people don't have layers on. They have everything taken off of them. They're basically stripped down to the barest layers of, pants and shirt or shorts and shirt. And if they're lucky, they may be given a change of clothes. But oftentimes, if they've crossed rivers or jungles or cities, they have to dry off in those same clothes in these cold conditions. So if you can imagine, being in these freezing cold conditions, what does it do as far as a health perspective?
Ashtyn, it's hard to believe that this government has a department called Health and Human Services, and no one from that department concerned with health has communicated to these people in control of the initial custody that there's something kind of 18th century about the idea that cold is going to kill those germs.
Right. I mean, it's absolutely barbaric, and I don't see any scientific basis in it, and it contraindicates the notion or the statement that there's any sufficient medical attention there at all, because I believe if there were sufficient medical attention, if there were a sufficient amount of competent physicians there attending to these immigrants, this wouldn't be a practice in place.
Ashtyn, I want to get to your motivation of why you decided to take yourself down there as a volunteer and get involved.
Lawrence, my motivation for being down there was from a personal perspective. It's one thing to hear everything that you hear in the media and, see pictures and things that can be easily distorted, but this isn't an issue of partisan politics. This is an issue of humanity, and I think the biggest thing that I can stress is that people need to see eyes themselves, that they need to lay eyes on this situation, and that's exactly what I went down there to do. I wanted to lay eyes on the situation, assess what was going on, and help in any way I could.
Ashtyn Tayler, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.